You're listening to Head Voice, bringing you inside the minds of the best in contemporary a cappella. I'm Evan.
And I'm Kayla, and this week we had Tracy Robertson on. Tracy's been in many different groups, both instrumental and a cappella. He was a former music director of Pitch Slapped. He was in Overboard. He's toured with Vocalosity, and he's currently in M-pact. During this episode, we talked about his background with music, some of his improv skills, and his inspirations.
Links to anything mentioned in the episode, as well as all the projects Tracy is involved in, will be mentioned in the show notes, as always. In this episode, we also had a few questions from some of our listeners. Shout out to Yang Chen and Isaiah Carter. If you want to have your question be featured in an upcoming episode, make sure to follow us on Instagram at Headvoicepodcast, and look out for any posts about upcoming guests, and you might hear your own question on one of our upcoming episodes. But for now, we hope you enjoyed this episode of Head Voice with Tracy Robertson.
If I could choose the way things...
Awesome. So, hi, Tracy. Thank you for joining us on Head Voice. On Head Voice. We're super stoked to have you on today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, of course. So I just want to start it off by asking if you could kind of give us a little background into your life and how you first got into music and how you decided to pursue it.
Sure. So my parents met singing barbershop. So I was kind of born into that world. My parents are both hobby musicians, but my dad was directing a women's barbershop chorus at the time in Watertown, New York. And my mom ended up, she moved to a small town from suburbia of a larger city and was looking for things to do after a winter of like, cool. So if you don't snowmobile and ice fish, then you gotta find something else to do around here. So she ended up seeing this choir before the barbershop chorus perform, and she joined that, and that's when my parents met, and they super connected enough that I came about. How on earth did that happen? And yeah, so that was what I was born into. That was my introduction to a cappella and music in general, ear training stuff, learning tags, being like 6 years old, hanging out at barbershop conventions, having people teach me tags and stuff, and yeah, just learn about harmony. You know, that was really super formative for me. And then I took piano lessons, played saxophone in school, ended up playing this steel drum band for a little while.
Nice.
And the guy who started that was a huge mentor for me, like through middle school and high school, Dan Hammond. And that was my introduction. That was the first time that I was gigging professionally, making money, playing at private parties and stuff like that, playing this like Caribbean calypso stuff, you know, at people's beautiful homes, like, you know, in the Thousand Islands region of upstate New York. So that was the beginning of, that was the seed first getting planted of like, you can actually make a little money doing this music thing. That's kind of interesting. Yeah. But at that point in time, I was still like, no, I'm going to go into wildlife biology. You know, I want to like go catch snakes for a living or whatever. And just like, you know, play in the woods.
As you do.
Indeed. So I ended up deciding that I was going to major in that, but I wanted to minor in music. Still have to audition in order to minor. And so through my process of auditioning, I was looking at schools that only had classical music programs. And I hadn't really done a lot of classical stuff. So I was taking classical voice lessons for several months there, just so I'd be able to kind of fake my way through a classical audition. And through that process, ended up realizing like, no, music is the thing. And so I ended up going to SUNY Fredonia for a couple of years. And that was great for me, but I kind of realized like, I think here I am going to music school without having looked at music schools, you know? And so Berkeley came up readily, and I ended up going to check it out and was super inspired, and ultimately ended up transferring there. I was lucky enough to get substantial help from the school and made it worthwhile. And yeah, so Berkeley became the place, and that was like totally changed my understanding. I had some really awesome opportunities there. People got a chance to work with and meet, and just that it's like taking all the prettiest fish and putting them in one fishbowl, just like see what they're gonna do kind of thing. So that was good for me, and that is the short version, as long as that was.
So since school and in school, you've had an opportunity to perform in a very wide number of ensembles. There's been, you know, I'm not going to list them all because there've been a lot, but clearly in doing, you know, all these different styles of music, whether it's, you know, poppier stuff with like M-pact or Overboard, or with the jazzier side with Pitch Slapped, or you've done a lot more like world stuff or improvising. Like what would you say are like your main inspirations musically? What are what inspires you to do what you do?
Totally. Inevitably that's changed over time, but I'll tell you that playing in that steel drum band when I was like 14, 15, 16 and up like through high school, that was my first introduction to music that didn't come from Merca. And so that really opened my mind right on up. And I started playing percussion too. And towards the end of that time started playing bass and just all of that stuff, like the coordination of having to learn these different grooves and then starting to like really sit in it and learning about the cultures, learning how people move to that stuff, which I never dug super deep into, but just like enough that I like started to, it was inspiring to me in any case. So that was totally a thing. And then Bobby McFerrin was a huge influence. Got pretty obsessed with him my senior year of high school, and had the opportunity to sing with him my first year at Berkeley. And that was the process leading up to that concert was one of the most formative spans of time for me. A combination of just being at Berkeley after having been at a classical music school, just a completely different vibe. I was discovering that I had ability in music that I never realized was there, much less relevant. So it was crazy. So that and then just this process that we went through of like unlocking the creativity, that definitely changed me. And that's some of the stuff that I'm at this point in time when I'm doing the free improvisation stuff with people that feel good to do it with. Right. That is absolutely the most moving thing that I can do for me today.
And speaking of improv, I feel like you're the type of person who really values circle singing and really using improv to develop your sound and just your ability to work with other singers. So can you just kind of talk about that a little bit and how you've used improv in the past or currently use it to help yourself or help others musically?
Totally. So I can start off simply speaking, or more shallow, I guess is what I mean. I definitely use improvisation for like the circle singing stuff, the rules of this game Motor, right? Where you like have like a simple like rhythmic motif essentially, and then you like interlock, you have another part that fits in the spaces, an interlocking part, and then you harmonize either of those 1 time, 2 times, whatever, and then you have some kind of textural counterpoint, like a background line kind of situation, a counter melody, and then you have to have bass function, you have percussive function, and then you have to have a story, you have to have a melody or something that's happening, that all of that is the bed for, right? So using those basic principles in arranging for a cappella has been so much fun. As like default, whenever I'm coming up with background parts, I like come up with a part that's like grooving well, that's lining up with the bass line in an interesting way, and then I forget about the bass line and I look at how I want to have something else fit into that. I love it when the background parts alone are just like chugging along. They're creating all the energy. So then by the time you throw vocal percussion on it, it's like, okay, cool, I guess. Like that's nice. But it's like the whole thing was grooving so well without it, that
it doesn't rely on the perk necessarily.
Exactly. That's just like a fun thing with arranging stuff, and that ends up being, for people who aren't super theoretically aware, a lot of kids. So at A Cappella Academy, I've brought in this whole circle singing thing and the use of Motor, that game, for arranging classes, and people who have great ears but don't necessarily know all the technicalities, that have a really easy time. They feel like they're able to succeed pretty rapidly at creating something that they truly enjoy by using that method for creating the background parts, because especially in today's day and age where it's starting to change. Things are definitely getting more exciting, more creative, but traditionally in a cappella land where we're like just covering pop songs, the bass, like the chord progression, we're going to leave that basically the same. So bass line just kind of is what it is. Right. The melody is what it is. The groove is what it is. We just got to figure out what the heck we want to do with everybody else. And so this makes for a really fun way to come up with what everybody else is going to do. And it ends up you end up coming up with parts that are inevitably fun to sing, easy, fun to sing, and they take the arrangement somewhere too,
Yeah.
So that's kind of like some of like the shallower basic stuff, but the reality, I think, is that the improv thing is, it's like a microcosm for like how we want the world to be, So that's always interesting to see, to watch people feel that, and sometimes even consciously realize that. But that's, just deciding like, when is it that I'm going to hold space for you? And when is it that so me holding space for you means I'm either leaving room or I'm going to like come up with something and I'm going to stay there,
right,
so that you have this bed to play over,
Yeah.
and then I'm going to be sensitive to you and feel like you're kind of running out of ideas, or you're coming to an end, with your thing, whatever your statement is that you've made. And so I'm going to, start feeding you some more ideas just to see if there's any more that we can eke out of you, or maybe you're done, and then I will take something that you've done and start working with that. I don't know, whatever. It's conversation. So that's, I'm still really just skimming the surface, but that's a little snippet into why I love it so very much.
Definitely. Yeah. I think conversation, which you just mentioned, is it's totally, I feel like, in my limited experience with improv and jamming and stuff, like that's what it's all about, is just, listening and having the courage to like go back and forth and like, play off of each other.
Yes.
And I think that also applies to a good amount of what you do, because you're a very accomplished vocal percussionist as well as a bass singer. So in terms of groove, that's also, I feel like, a big conversation between rhythm sections, regardless of how many people are in them. And so I guess when you're on either side of the coin, whether it's, doing beatboxing with pitch slapped or vocalosity or whatever, or with M-pact being the bass singer, what kind of things are you thinking about when you're trying to make that conversation work and fit into that groove? Totally.
I've just been realizing more and more lately that it has to be in my body. I've been getting more and more into subtly dancing all the time, Yeah, it's just an awareness thing. It's just an awareness thing. You just start listening harder, and inevitably noticing more, and noticing stuff that's more and more difficult to quantify. It ends up feeling like it's boiling down to like, am I actually present right now, or am I just like daydreaming while I'm singing? And when I'm grooving at my hardest, it's because I am nowhere else. I'm only here. Only right here. And then after that, it's like, then all of a person's influences are just going to come through, whatever it is that, whatever kind of music you've listened to, like that's going to have such a huge part in what it is that you're, where your groove is going to feel like, basically. But yeah, just worshiping a click too. Like that's a thing that a lot of people, a lot of singers in particular, don't do. And I have, when I'm rehearsing groups, Pitch Slap, when we were getting ready for ICCAs in 2014, I took the finale file of all of our songs that we were doing for the set and put them into one big file and made sequenced a very basic drum groove thing, just in finale to go along with it. And so we would rehearse the set to the click that I had made that had count offs for the songs, everything, we knew how long the set was going to be as long as we stayed with our tempos. You know what I mean? Exactly. And that was huge. And then to rehearse choreo with that as well, then the choreo became the choreo wouldn't feel right if we were not in the right tempo, kind of thing, So yeah, I think that's huge. And the thing too is with intonation stuff, chords can't tune unless everybody's landing at the same time. So it's so interesting to see. Also, the kind of listening that it takes to be in time fixes tuning stuff. So that's been an interesting thing for me to experiment with. Stuff is just not locking. Okay, well, maybe we're actually just not in time. Turn on a click and all of a sudden tuning stuff starts happening sometimes. It's been interesting to experiment with that. But awareness stuff.
That's interesting. How are you able to, when you're rehearsing with groups like that or for yourself, how do you balance maintaining an organic feeling to the music while having a click, which is inherently gridded. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, that ends up being an interesting thing. The click is jarring. It's a jarring noise to be having in a room where you're trying to make emotionally driven art, but I really love it when I'm working with musicians who see the value of having that sound in the room. And so that ends up just being a thing I think I don't tolerate. Basically, like it's interesting what happens when you just don't have tolerance for something. Then it just kind of has to go away. As a director, you know what I mean, of a group. So like I just kind of like don't have tolerance for like being annoyed with having a click going. It's just like, no, like we're gonna do the like with the click in time thing now, because that's like how we make good music. And there's not gonna be a conversation about it. We need to keep going. We're trying to make progress. Why are we talking about this? Like we need to go this way. So that's definitely been a thing before, and that's been I've had to believe in myself a little more in order to be more of a stickler about that, because in the past, when I first started using a click in rehearsal with pitch slap, people were like, wow, this is annoying. I would hook it up to the sound system like in the classroom that we'd be rehearsing in, so it'd be like in the speakers in the room, and of course, like, yes, that is particularly jarring, but like we weren't in time, so I'd turn it up. So anyways, that's been an interesting thing for me to learn just for myself, like as a director. And
I'd imagine that definitely ingrains that in you. So then when you do perform it, your nerves don't get to you. Like it's something that's ingrained into you. This way, when you perform it, then it's just second nature at that point.
Totally. And then and that's an interesting thing too, because obviously your energy. Like when your energy changes when you're about to go on stage and when you're on stage, time fluctuates a little bit. Like absolutely. More stuff happens, more stuff seems to be happening in less time. And we're all okay with that, And so that's definitely an interesting thing. Something that I learned from Erin this year at A Cappella Academy. She had the kids it's Erin Bentlage. She had the kids like run in place, just do a lot of physical activity, bouncing, jumping, whatever, running in place, to get their energy to be high before stepping on stage. And she explained like the natural drugs situation that's going on in your brain when that happens, but essentially you end up passing through this phase that normally happens while you're on stage, and then you're already coming down off of it by the time you get onto the stage. And check back in with her, she'll explain all the science. She explained it to us, but in any case, very cool. We like it when time doesn't all of a sudden become different from what it was before.
So in prep for your episode, we actually asked our listeners if they had any questions for you.
Sure.
And so we got a couple questions, and Isaiah Carter, a fellow pitch slapper, we actually recorded pitch slapper. We recorded an episode with him the other day, so that's coming out soon. But he was asking that a lot of your vocal perk seems to be it seems like you're experimenting with different variations of rhythms, and sometimes it sounds like a jazz combo sort of effect, and it kind of strays away from the beat machine kind of style. So he was just asking about how did you develop your particular style,
and like your kit too, I think.
Sure. So I sure as heck was not listening to a lot of electronic music till recently, honestly. So when I first started making funny noises, I was in like 5th grade, and I was literally rhythmically sloshing spit. I was going just like pushing saliva and air through my teeth and sucking it back in. And that was like all it was. So that then progressed into, I ended up seeing rock cappella in concert when I was like 11 or 12. And I was like, whoa, that's pretty cool. So then I started playing around with other stuff, and I discovered like the bass, like the kick sound that most people use, like the PB situation, with like a little bit of buzz or whatever. And so I started playing around with that, and that definitely changed things for me and made me feel like I was having more fun. But aside from that, all the sounds that I was making, I stumbled upon them of my own accord. And I think that up until recently, that's the way most beatboxers were doing their thing. It's like they were making sounds that were weird enough that they weren't really going to do them around anybody else. And so on their own time, they're discovering what their mouth is capable of. And they would end up coming up with absolutely their own palette of sounds, and it's a very, very organic, relatively unquantifiable process.
Yeah.
You know, it's evolution is taking place. You know,
Yeah.
So just inevitably the kinds of music that I've listened to, definitely listened to just more and more world music stuff. When I was at Berklee, I was asked to do vocal percussion stuff for music that I had not really listened to very much before. And so I was imitating like shakers and tablas and, you know, bandero and like whatever, just like imitating, you know, congas, like all this stuff. And so I ended up really having to explore, because I recognized that like kick and snare and hi-hat is like not applicable here, you know? So I ended up just experimenting, and then one thing that I discovered when I was in Pitch Slap that I think was huge for me was recognizing how reflective the perk can be of the, not just the ebb and flow of the entire ensemble, but specifically of the solo. The phrasing of the soloist is a thing that you can follow with the perk. And I think that led me to tune my ear in on a new level.
Yeah.
In terms of connection of phrase. Making sure that no sound is coming out of nowhere without it having been set up as a breaking of a pattern for emotional effect. You know, otherwise it's like, we really want everything to feel like it's actually absolutely connected, kind of thing.
That's super interesting. I was gonna say, I think you have a very unique kit on the one hand, and then also I think whenever I've heard you singing bass in any group, I think that you also have a very distinct sound there as well, because I think especially now, especially scholastically, but everywhere, I think, you know, a lot of bass singers are singing on a DM sound, and there's a very particular way that the formant is being made in their mouths or whatever, and it's kind of all coming together where there's not a lot of character in a lot of bass singers, for better or for worse. And so I guess when you're singing, it kind of feels like syllables are a little bit fluid, and you let your own natural tone quality come out. So like when you're singing bass, just like, what are you thinking about when you're doing that? I
will tell you that I love singing bass so much. And I think a big part of why I love it so much is I just trust myself and I'm not thinking. Yeah. Except about groove. You know, like that I'm thinking about groove, or I'm thinking about the harmony, but the syllable stuff ends up being this subconscious representation of the dynamics. And anything that pitch choice can't reflect, you know, pitch and rhythm choice can't reflect. And, you know, man, even rhythm stuff, because, you know, a bass line that goes dum 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 versus dum 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 dum. I mean, that's like totally different thing going on. You know, those tell a very different story. And even though on the paper you may see the exact same thing. You know, so that's been an interesting thing to realize. But yeah, it ends up being this like totally subconscious, like just releasing of whatever I'm feeling needs to happen. And in terms of influence there, huge influence for me was like Joey Blake, Bobby McFerrin. Joey Blake was a teacher of mine at Berklee, amazing bass vocalist, who is a member of Voices Trial with Bobby McFerrin, and he's one of the people who really, you know, started, like he put together this group, the Singing Tribe, that did that concert with Bobby, and then I ended up being in this group with him for a while, called Sung Deep, and again, like, just I was perk in that ensemble, just like listening to him do his thing all the time. I think he was hands down the biggest single influence on me as a bass vocalist. And then from there, I've had to sit with the reality that I'm not actually a bass You know, I'm capable in the morning of hitting some good notes, and like, you know, the rest of the time it's mic technique and groove. Like that's how I allow myself to continue believing that I'm a bass, is because of the obsession with harmony. You know, what is it that the top people are doing this, what can I do underneath? Being aware of how, if I go here, if I approach this, you know, whatever, all this playing around changes the character of what, you know, the perceived character of what's going on in the top voices. So that stuff, and then the whole groove thing.
Yeah.
Very cool.
So just to kind of jump back a little bit to pitch slapped, and I think you're talking a lot about groove and vocal perk, and I do think that a lot of vocal perk and groove was important to you as a director or arranger in Pitch Slapped, and you have been lauded as being part of the reason that Pitch Slapped kind of transformed into something that's more jazzier and more or different from what it was prior to that. So can you kind of speak to that, and maybe it wasn't just you, but kind of being part of that change and what that was like for you, kind of developing Pitch Slapped sound?
Yeah, So when I joined Pitch Slapped, the people who, so like Kate Wright, you know, she's like the main known founder of Pitch Slapped. When she came into Berklee, my understanding is that it is like Berklee School of Jazz. That was the world that she was stepping into. Yeah. And she wasn't super into that. She was a vocalist that was interested in seeing some pop music happen at Berklee. Right. And so and we've seen that happen. We've seen Berklee really move into a pop thing, and then I think what's cool is to see that it's starting to move into something that's a little more sophisticated than that, because for many reasons. But in any case, so Pitch Slap, when I got into the group, was like not interested in doing like that weird world music jazzy stuff. Like that's hard and that's weird, you know? And so I ended up having to get my fix for other music stuff in other places. So I was very busy. I was doing Pitch Slap, but I was doing like 70 million other things, because I like wanted to actually sing, for example, and I also wanted to do other styles of music that it seemed like Pitch Slap was at that time a little hesitant to do. And even like some of the arrangements that I brought in to Pitch Slap at that point in time, the group just wasn't interested, you know. And it was just a different dynamic, you know. It was a group of strong enough soloists that they had good enough ears that they could blend very well. So they made extremely good pop ensemble singers, right? But I was in other ensembles that had singers that were significantly less impressive as soloists and less impressive overall as vocalists at that point in their process. But their work ethic, I think, was better, and just had a more diverse range of interest. So I would bring arrangements that were significantly more difficult than anything that was happening in Pitch Slap to other ensembles, and those ensembles would put in the time and take 2 or 3 rehearsals to learn an arrangement, whereas Pitch Slap was like, whoa, it's taking more than half of a rehearsal or more than a rehearsal to learn this arrangement, you know. It was like they were not interested in that, and so that was aggravating to me for sure. So that was a thing. Like when I finally did become, you know, the director of the group, I was excited. I had been like ready and rearing to make some new stuff happen, and we were lucky enough to have the talent in the group to make that happen. There were definitely people that were, you know, people who'd been in the group longer, who remembered what the group had been and had it in their head that like, this is what Pitch Slap is supposed to be, right? Tradition. And I was like, Pitch Slap just started like 6 years ago. Like, why are we worrying about tradition right now? Can we just make some good music? So we, you know, and it's not like there was actually that much hemming and hawing about it, but we did make some really great music. And I was lucky to have Jared as my assistant director, Jared Jenkins, and he was super talented, and that was a great experience for me. Just realizing that I had an opportunity to have an assistant director that was far more talented than I was, and you know, and knowing that he's such a humble guy that he really wasn't really going to employ his services for the group unless it was very clear that like we wanted him to be present in that way in the room. So it was really interesting experience for me. You know, like I had to like eat a piece of humble pie because he's amazing, and that ended up being ultimately an awesome thing for me and for the group. And I think for him, you know, he's doing a lot of work with vocal groups now, you know, and I think that, not that he wouldn't have done that, but Pitch Slap, just having gone a couple of places, done a couple of things, you know, it just connected him with some people, you know, and he is killing it.
Yeah.
He's absolutely killing
Well,
it
you
now
guys-
in the real world.
You guys together, ultimately, I feel like everything you're talking about kind of culminated in that ICCA set that you took to finals. So I guess just kind of what was the impetus at that point to say that you and Jared were going to put your heads down and this is what you're going to put together?
Well, so I had, like, looking to the next year, once I knew that I was going to be director and we had decided we were going to do ICCAs, I spent the next, like, that whole summer before my year of directing, like, kind of thinking about concept stuff for our set. And I had just that previous semester, I think, seen Esperanza Spalding in concert
Yes.
with her, like, the Radio Music Society.
Yeah.
I think. Yeah. The Radio Music Society album, whatever. She was, like, on that tour. And they started the set off with, like, playing a recording of some, like, old jazz thing, and then it would fade out, and then the band live would play some other thing, and then they would fade out, and then they would play a recording of another thing, and the band live would phase in play. It was amazing. And I was like, Pitch Slap can do this a cappella.
Yeah.
Like, we can do this. We can do it. You know, we have two people in the group, we ended up ultimately having two people in the group with perfect pitch, but, like, even without that, like, we can sing, we can have a few people in the group start singing this thing, and then a couple people in a different key, in a different groove, different thing altogether sing this thing. Like, that was my vision initially. And we didn't end up ultimately doing that. We stayed together, you know, for the whole thing. But that was that was the inspiration. So it was like Pitch Slap, radio music, live, whatever, you know, like that was kind of the thing. And what ended up ultimately coming of it, when I look at the final product, I can't help but feel like that got lost, you know, like pretty early on in the set, but whatever. It was fun, you know. It was a good, you know, it was a good thing. I'm glad I did that instead of all the homework that I didn't do. So, yeah. But yeah, that was kind of the baby of the thing. And then Jared, just the way his brain works with music, it's like record. His brain is on record every time he listens to something, and so we're playing like. Jared is a machine at creating mashups because he just remembers exactly how music was and sees like, oh, these two things fit together. These two songs are in the same key. Oh, this song is only, you know, one, you know, a half step out from this key, but the groove is the same, you know?
Yeah.
Can we slap them together? Or like, oh, check it out. The bass line of this song works with, you know, like he's just, all this
Puzzle
stuff is just
pieces.
cataloged. Anything that's passed through his ears is like a snippet of it. There's a file that he can just like pull out at a moment's notice, you know? So arranging with him was amazing because he just like, you know, he just had this wealth of knowledge. I would come up with like the I Wish arrangement that I did. I was like, hey, look at this bass line that I want to try and throw under the horn hits at the end of I Wish. And later on I realized like, oh, that's the bass line of Lovely Day by Bill Withers. And I didn't realize that. I like literally thought I came up with it. He's like, oh, I thought that was intentional. And I was like, no, I know I'm not
amazing.
I
I'm
feel
not
like that
smart.
happens to us too more than often
Yeah.
than
Oh,
not.
absolutely. Yeah.
Awesome. So unfortunately, we're actually nearing the end of our episode today, which is really sad. But the two final questions that we like to ask our guests are: what is one thing in the acapella sphere that excites you, some trend or whatnot, or forward moving thing? And then the second part is: what is on the agenda for you? Like, what's in the works?
So in the acapella world right now, there is getting to be more and more legitimately talented people that are getting involved,
Right.
and that means that there's more and more call for. It makes it such that music education is getting to be more and more relevant.
Yeah.
I think that in the past there's been some like interesting just like singer stuff, like in I think in the rest of the world, in the rest of the music world, there's this understanding that like singers don't tend to know so much, you know, and there's some like jokes that get made about singers. So the interesting about acapella world is that it's all singers.
Yeah.
So sometimes this singer world made of singers, run by singers, you know, where like the cool kids are singers, you know what I mean? And the singers are learning from singers. Sometimes there's like massive gaps in like understanding the true palette of colors that exist for us to be expressing the emotions that we're trying to express with this art that we're trying to make. And so I'm most excited about the fact that that is changing. I love that anybody can sing, but I also really love it when high school kids who are getting into a cappella are not told that what they're doing is already good enough. I like it when there's stuff going on that's inspiring them, because there are people that are getting involved with a cappella that have the capacity to go really, really super far. And I love the idea of them just being inspired to pursue, to just run to the greatest extent of their potential.
Yeah.
Kind of thing.
Yeah,
So that's
sure.
really, really super exciting for me. Yeah. Oh, one more thing with that. Then inevitably creativity, better art being made. Right.
Mm-hmm.
That's like ultimately the thing.
The goal,
You know,
definitely.
better just because it's like real or true or like more, a wider variety. So
Right.
for me right now, I am involved with the M-pact thing. That's probably the biggest, like the single most engaging thing going on with me right now. I'm really excited about what that group is doing. We have obviously had a bunch of turnover recently, and it looks like with this new energy we've got in the room, there's a lot of excitement to see where the group can go.
Yeah.
We want to travel, a bunch of young folks, and we want to see the world. And so we are in the process of seeing how it is that we can get our music to take us to Europe, like as soon as possible.
Awesome. That's
You know,
exciting.
so and just like wherever else. So that's a big thing. And then we're also excited about collaborations and just like I don't know. And it's a good group of guys. Like they're becoming some of my best friends right now, and I feel really lucky for that. So good stuff there. Outside of that, freelancing, meeting more and more people in the session world, and that's exciting. These are some musicians there's musicians that I'm meeting that I absolutely look up to and have looked up to for a while, and I'm getting a chance to meet them and sometimes sing with them, and that's a really good experience for me because I'm also learning how much I have to learn still, and so that's super exciting. I'm also involved with another project with my friend Jack called Leyu, Leyeux. We have a show on Tuesday actually, and I'm playing bass and beatboxing with him.
Awesome.
So that's stretching my brain in a really productive way. A lot of sitting with a click, so anything that I'm doing that forces me to worship a click more is like inevitably A-okay with me. So that's been great. And then outside of that, it's just constantly digging deeper for myself, just learning about myself, finding the self-help books that feel like they're the realest, and checking that stuff out, learn about philosophy, spirituality, psychology. All that stuff is as interesting to me as music, if not more.
Sure.
Music, if anything, is just a language to communicate everything that you learn through those other three things that I mentioned. So
Definitely.
Love that.
Yeah. Well, thank you for joining us, Tracy. It's been a real pleasure talking to you.
For sure. Thank you for having me.
We will link all those projects that he just mentioned in the show notes, and we hope that you will join us next week for a new episode of Head Voice.
Up Head Voice.
Dun, dun,
Right
dun.
on time.
Look at that.
Without you.